Glad you're here. Take a breath. This story isn't loud, but it stays with you. Just listen. And if something in it feels familiar, maybe it's because part of it was always yours. In a quiet town nestled in the heart of the English countryside, life moved at its own deliberate pace. There was nothing remarkable about the inhabitants of this town, save for the quiet strength of its people. Among them was Clara Westfield, a woman of striking beauty, but even more remarkable for her mind. At 27, she had already turned down several suitors, her heart closed off from the world. Clara, much like her father, had little patience for what society deemed necessary: marriage, children, and the quiet life of domesticity. She sought more, though she could not name it, nor could she find anyone who understood her. One rainy afternoon, as she sat by the window of her drawing room, her thoughts consumed by the uncertainty of her future, she saw him. Gabriel Moreton, the stranger, was the kind of man she had never expected, tall and unassuming, yet somehow possessing a presence that made the room seem smaller. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. He was not like the others, not the aggressive suitor, nor the gentleman seeking only her fortune. He had an air of quiet rebellion, a yearning to break from the shackles of convention. Much like her own, she could feel that familiar stirring in her chest, but she suppressed it. That evening, Gabriel approached Clara with a proposal that would forever alter the course of their lives. He was not seeking her heart, he said, nor her hand in marriage. Instead, he asked her to join him in a venture, one that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. Clara hesitated, but for reasons she could not name, she said yes. The next morning, Clara awoke with a sense of trepidation. Gabriel's words from the night before echoed in her mind. We can create something real, something meaningful, together. He had spoken with such sincerity, and though she had not fully understood his plan, something about it tugged at her. It was not merely a business venture as he had promised, but something far deeper, something that would require them both to surrender what they had always known. Clara dressed quickly and made her way to Gabriel's modest office on the outskirts of town. The building was small and unassuming, yet within its walls was a vision waiting to unfold. When Clara entered, she was greeted by a cold draft at the sight of Gabriel standing by a small table cluttered with papers and a few books. He did not offer her a seat, but rather began speaking immediately as though he had rehearsed every word. Clara, I am asking you to help me found a new institution, an institution that will challenge the very fabric of this town, its traditions, its expectations, a place where ideas are free, where individuals can seek their true purpose, not bound by the chains of social obligation. Gabriel's words were sharp, and Clara could feel the weight of them. His dream was ambitious, almost reckless. He wanted her to use her inheritance to fund his dream, to take a stand against the oppressive norms that held them both in place. At first, Clara was stunned. Her inheritance was meant for a future that she could shape. But not like this. She had always been the dutiful daughter, never straying too far from what was expected of her. But in that moment, Gabriel's vision felt like a beacon. It was dangerous, yes, but it was real. Clara took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm yet filled with conviction. I will help you, Gabriel, but you must understand there is no turning back. As Clara and Gabriel worked together day by day, their project began to take shape. The small institution they were founding was not merely a school or a social club. It was a direct challenge to the status quo. Their aim was to create a place where women and men alike could explore their minds, free from the constraints of tradition. But not everyone welcomed their vision. Clara's mother, a woman of strict values, was horrified when she learned of the endeavor. "You are throwing away your future for a fool's dream," she scolded, her voice tinged with desperation. "Marriage, children, those are the things you should be striving for. What kind of woman forsakes her duty for an idea?" Clara stood her ground. "I do not seek your approval, Mother," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I seek something more, something that belongs to me alone." Her mother's face hardened, but Clara was unmoved. She knew the risks. Gabriel had warned her that their venture would not be easy. They would face opposition from all sides, particularly from those who feared change. And yet, Clara felt a growing certainty in her heart. This was her path. This was the life she had been searching for. With Gabriel by her side, they could make a difference. But at what cost? The road ahead was not without its obstacles. Clara and Gabriel's institution faced resistance from the town's elite, many of whom saw their work as a threat to the established order. The gossip in town grew louder, the whispers more insistent. "They are dangerous," they said. "They will bring shame upon us all." Clara felt the weight of their words, but she refused to back down. Every day she spent in the office, working alongside Gabriel, she was more convinced that their work mattered. They were not merely creating a place of learning, they were creating a sanctuary for those who felt stifled by society's rigid expectations. But the pressure began to mount. Clara's inheritance was dwindling faster than anticipated. They needed more funding, more support, and the townspeople were growing increasingly hostile. Gabriel, too, began to show signs of stress. His passion, once a beacon of hope, was now a driving force that consumed him. One night, as Clara worked late into the evening, Gabriel arrived at the office with troubling news. "We've been denied again," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "No one wants to support us. They say we are a threat to their way of life." Clara stood up, her face pale but determined. "We will not stop. We cannot stop." Despite the challenges, Clara and Gabriel's resolve only strengthened. They began to attract like-minded individuals, people who shared their vision for a society that embraced individuality and freedom of thought. Slowly, the institution began to grow, and with it, the seeds of change were planted. It was then that Clara received a letter from a distant relative, a wealthy widow who had long been estranged from the family. The letter was short but promising. "I have heard of your work, Clara. I believe in your cause. I will send the funds you need to continue." With renewed hope, Clara and Gabriel pushed forward. The funds came, and with them, a sense of validation. They were not alone in their pursuit, but as their influence grew, so did the dangers they faced. Clara found herself at a crossroads. The stakes had never been higher, and the world around her was beginning to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. But one thing was certain. She was no longer just a woman of society's expectations. She was a force in her own right, and with Gabriel by her side, she would not be silenced. The tide that once carried Clara forward now pulled at her ankles with quiet dread. Though their institution began to find footing, the tension between her and Gabriel deepened. Success, it seemed, had not brought peace, but rather a sharpening of edges. Gabriel grew distant, his mind burdened, his tone clipped. The dream they once shared now wore the face of obligation. Clara noticed the change in him not in grand gestures, but in pauses, too long between words, too short between meetings. He no longer lingered after lectures, no longer smiled when she entered the room. Instead, he spent hours locked in the study, poring over ledgers and letters with a furrowed brow. One evening, she confronted him. "You're somewhere else, Gabriel," she said, standing in the low lamplight. "Not here, not with me." He looked up slowly, his face pale, his eyes weary. "There's more at stake than you realize," he said. "We have enemies, Clara, and allies who watch with conditions. Everything we've built, they'll take it from us if we make one wrong move." She studied his face, trying to find the man she had believed in. "And what if we've already made it?" she asked softly. Gabriel didn't answer. That night, Clara walked home alone, the cobblestones cold beneath her shoes. For the first time, she wondered not if she'd chosen the right fight, but if she had chosen the right companion in it. Winter came suddenly to the town, as if the very sky had decided to retreat from the world. Frost gathered on the windows of the institution, and Clara felt it inside her as much as out. Something in her had quieted, a deep internal hush, as if waiting for a blow she couldn't name. Gabriel's absences became longer. When he was present, he was curt, efficient. Their conversations were reduced to matters of function, invoices, meetings, timetables. His warmth had not cooled, cooled, it had evaporated. Yet the institution thrived. Students came from nearby towns, drawn by whispers of a new kind of place, a place where minds mattered more than surnames. They brought light and laughter, but Clara remained unmoved by it. It was not joy she sought, it was meaning, and meaning, once shared, had now become solitary. She returned often to the room where they had first drafted the charter, the place where hope had once lit their faces. Now it was silent, its shelves burdened with dust and half-read books. One day, a letter arrived. Gabriel had left town. No explanation, no goodbye, only a folded sheet. "You were right. We cannot outrun who we are." Clara read it once, then again, and again. The rage came slowly, not loud, but cold, not for the loss of him, but for the theft of their shared belief. He had abandoned the dream they built together, and now it was hers alone to carry. The world did not pause for Clara's grief. The institution, now known across counties, demanded her presence, her decisions, her clarity, and so she gave it. Day after day, she stood before students and benefactors alike, speaking with poise she did not feel and conviction that barely held. Inside, she was hollowing. Gabriel's departure had not broken her heart. It had severed her purpose, for theirs had not been a romance in the flesh, but something rarer, more dangerous, a union of ideals. And now, half that vision had vanished, leaving her to carry the whole, unbalanced and weary. She never spoke his name again. The townspeople noticed the shift. They called her iron-hearted, unyielding. Some whispered admiration, others fear. She no longer visited friends, no longer walked the riverbanks at dusk. She existed within walls, surrounded by ink and paper and the faces of young people who still believed the world could be remade. One evening, as snow laced the windows in quiet spirals, she stood alone in the grand lecture hall. Her eyes wandered the empty seats. It struck her then, not as tragedy, but as truth. This hall, this institution, this legacy, it had never belonged to him. It was hers. It had always been hers. And perhaps, she thought, that was both the burden and the gift of it all. Years passed in the way only age understands, quick in memory, slow in the living. Clara had grown into her solitude, with the quiet dignity of someone who no longer sought to explain herself. The institution thrived. It bore her name now, though she never asked for it. People came from far corners to learn, to listen, to be reshaped. Yet she, the founder, had become myth-like, present, but distant. And then, on an early spring morning, the past knocked. Gabriel stood at the threshold, older, paler, not ruined but worn. Life had carved lines into him like water into stone. He said nothing at first, just removed his hat with a trembling hand and bowed his head. Clara did not speak. She simply looked at him, her gaze unreadable, not cold, not warm, just steady. "I was afraid," he said finally, "not of failure, of being wrong about myself." Her breath caught, though her face remained still. He looked up. "You weren't just braver than me, Clara. You were truer. I thought I had ideas, but you lived them." There was silence, long, deep. Then Clara stepped aside. "You may enter," she said, voice quiet, "but do not presume it is the same door you once walked through." And he did enter, head bowed, hands open, into a world he had abandoned, into a future that no longer waited for him. The years that followed were softer, not because the world had grown kinder, but because Clara had stopped expecting it to be otherwise. Her days were quieter now. She no longer taught, no longer stood at the pulpit or signed letters with trembling decisions. She walked the corridors not as a leader, but as a witness to what had been built, a living monument. Gabriel remained. He never reclaimed his former role, nor did she offer it. He worked quietly, archiving, repairing, tending to books and buildings with a reverence that spoke more than apology ever could. He spoke little of the years he had vanished into, and Clara did not ask. Some silences, after all, were not meant to be filled, only endured. Sometimes they sat together at dusk, overlooking the garden students had planted in her name. They rarely spoke of the past, for both had learned that memory was not a place to live in, only to pass through gently. And if there were moments when their hands touched, brief, unplanned, it was not with longing, but with recognition of what had been, of what could never be, and of what still was. When Clara passed, the institution did not mourn with weeping. It mourned in stillness. Her office was left untouched for a season. Her name was not carved into stone, but spoken in hallways, written in the margins of student journals, whispered by those who finally saw themselves in her. Gabriel remained until the end of that winter. He died quietly, surrounded by the words they once dreamt together. And so the institution stood, not in their names, but in their defiance, not as a memory, but as a continuation, for those who still dare to choose their fate.